I'm here with Prince Harry. Prince Harry. Harry.
I actually said you can call me whatever you want.
Okay.
The decision has been a surprise.
Long before the public arguments, broken relationships, and devastating royal accusations, Princess Anne allegedly saw something inside the palace that others refused to confront. She issued a warning quietly, expecting senior royals to act. Instead, the message was buried, and the consequences may now be impossible to contain. The warning did not come after Harry and Meghan had already walked away. It was not shaped by television interviews, memoirs, or years of open hostility. It allegedly came much earlier, when Meghan's arrival was still being celebrated as a royal triumph and the palace was presenting the future with carefully controlled confidence. That timing made Anne's intervention impossible to dismiss as bitterness. She was not known for emotional interference or private drama. Anne had spent her life accepting duty without demanding applause, carrying out exhausting responsibilities while rarely complaining. When she spoke about the survival of the institution, people listened, even when they did not like what she had to say. Behind closed doors, the mood was already changing. Meghan's popularity brought energy, attention, and international excitement. Some advisors believed she could help reshape the monarchy for a new generation. Others feared the palace was moving too quickly, making assumptions about a woman whose understanding of royal influence was very different from its own. Anne allegedly noticed the collision before anyone dared to name it. Meghan saw public visibility as a chance to create change. The monarchy saw visibility as something granted through hierarchy, patience, and obedience. Neither side fully understood how dangerous that difference could become. Anne's concern was not said to be about Meghan's background, career, nationality, or personality. It was about power. Who controlled the message? Who decided the limits? What happened when personal ambition met an institution that valued loyalty above individual freedom? Most troubling of all, Anne reportedly believed the palace was making promises it could never keep. Meghan was being encouraged to believe she could modernize royal life, yet the rules surrounding her remained fixed. She was being praised publicly while quietly expected to surrender control. The warning may have been delivered through a private conversation, a discreet message, or a verbal report passed to senior figures without leaving a formal record. Whatever form it took, it allegedly reached people capable of acting. But Harry may not have known. While he defended Meghan and imagined a new royal role beside her, concerns about his future were already being discussed without him. The palace smiled for the public while unease spread behind its walls. And the warning was not simply overlooked. It may have been deliberately contained because acknowledging it would have threatened a royal plan already in motion. And to understand why the palace chose silence over action, the story must return to the moment Meghan's arrival appeared to offer the monarchy something it desperately needed. To the outside world, Meghan represented change, confidence, and a modern future. Inside the institution, however, she was becoming something far more complicated, a symbol the palace wanted to promote, a personality it struggled to control, and a new royal whose expectations were colliding with traditions nobody had fully explained. At first, the excitement seemed genuine. Meghan brought attention from audiences the monarchy had struggled to reach. She was confident, articulate, internationally known, and beside Harry, she appeared to offer the palace a powerful new image. Senior courtiers saw opportunity. Together, the couple could represent youth, diversity, energy, and a more emotionally open royal family. But the institution did not understand change in the same way Meghan did. To her, influence meant using visibility to speak, act, and create immediate impact. To the palace, influence had to be earned through service, patience, hierarchy, and restraint. Royal life offered a platform, but it also demanded silence. It promised importance, yet denied independence. Meghan may have believed her ideas were being welcomed, while officials believed they were simply allowing her time to adjust. That misunderstanding deepened because many royal rules were never clearly explained. Newcomers were expected to observe, absorb, and obey. They were supposed to learn who entered first, who spoke publicly, which office approved a statement, and why even small decisions could carry constitutional meaning. Questioning those customs could be seen not as curiosity, but as resistance. Harry became increasingly determined that Meghan would not suffer quietly under the same pressures that had damaged other royal women. He challenged delays, restrictions, and decisions that seemed unfair. What began as protection slowly became confrontation. Disagreements emerged over staff, schedules, public messages, access to senior royals, precedents, and how quickly Meghan should receive a central role. Yet instead of addressing the growing conflict directly, courtiers passed responsibility between offices. Each department treated the problem as temporary. No one wanted to admit that the deeper issue was not a single disagreement, but two completely different ideas of royal power. Some senior figures feared that slowing Meghan down would appear hostile. Others worried that giving her too much freedom would create expectations the monarchy could never sustain. Anne was watching both sides. Her concern was not only what Meghan wanted, but what palace officials appeared to be promising her. She understood that public popularity could create a dangerous illusion inside a family where constitutional hierarchy always came first. Sooner or later, Meghan would discover that admiration did not equal authority, and Anne feared that moment would turn hope into betrayal. That discovery would come sooner than anyone expected. And when the first serious collision occurred, Anne reportedly recognized a pattern the rest of the family was still afraid to name. The first major rupture did not begin with a televised interview or a public accusation. It began behind palace doors, in a disagreement that seemed minor to outsiders but exposed a fundamental conflict. Meghan wanted clarity and authority, while the institution survived through ambiguity, hierarchy, and unquestioned obedience. The dispute reportedly began over something ordinary by royal standards: a schedule, a staffing decision, the wording of a public statement, or who held final authority over an upcoming engagement. Yet the details quickly became secondary. What mattered was how each side understood the refusal. Meghan allegedly believed she was being blocked after receiving private assurances that her ideas would be supported. To her, the sudden hesitation felt like a retreat. She had been welcomed as a force for change, but the moment she tried to shape that change, invisible limits appeared around her. Decisions were delayed. Requests passed from office to office. Answers arrived without explanation. Palace officials saw the situation differently. They believed standard procedures were being interpreted as personal rejection. In their world, no royal acted alone. Every speech, appearance, announcement, and appointment passed through layers of approval. What Meghan saw as obstruction, they considered order. Then, Harry stepped in. His intervention transformed an administrative disagreement into something far more dangerous. He reportedly demanded to know why Meghan was being restrained, who had challenged her authority, and whether the family truly intended to protect her. The issue was no longer about protocol. It became a test of respect, loyalty, and whether his wife would be treated as a valued member of the monarchy or merely managed by it. Whispers spread that the Sussex household was pulling away from the other royal offices. Communication became guarded. Staff grew nervous. Small disputes carried the weight of larger resentments. Anne allegedly saw the conflict as proof that the palace had never honestly defined Meghan's position. Royal privilege, in Anne's view, was earned through duty, discipline, and acceptance of limits. She did not necessarily dislike Meghan. What troubled her was the growing belief that emotional hurt could overrule institutional responsibility. Senior courtiers softened their reports, afraid of alarming Queen Elizabeth or provoking Harry further. But Anne reportedly questioned whether every restriction was now being presented to him as an attack on Meghan. That concern could no longer remain private. Anne soon sought a conversation with someone powerful enough to intervene before the damage became permanent. But when Anne finally carried her concerns upward, she was entering a palace already trapped between family loyalty, public expectations, and a secret fear of what Harry might do if Meghan felt rejected. The meeting was allegedly brief, private, and deliberately kept away from the normal flow of palace paperwork. Anne did not arrive with gossip or personal complaints. She came with a warning about Harry, Meghan, and a growing institutional crisis, and what she reportedly said left senior figures deeply unsettled. Anne is said to have requested a discreet conversation with those closest to the center of royal power. Whether the message was delivered directly to Queen Elizabeth, shared with Charles, or passed through a trusted senior official, its purpose was clear. The situation could no longer be treated as a collection of minor household disagreements. She reportedly spoke without anger. There was no dramatic accusation, no personal attack, and no attempt to humiliate Meghan. That calmness made the intervention more serious. Anne was not reacting to one difficult moment. She believed she was identifying a pattern. Her first concern was that Meghan was being elevated publicly before fully understanding the limits attached to royal status. The palace praised her influence, celebrated her popularity, and encouraged the idea that she represented a new era. Yet privately, the institution still expected discipline, patience, and obedience to a hierarchy that did not change for personal ambition. Her second concern involved Harry. Anne allegedly believed he was beginning to see every delay and restriction as proof that the family had failed his wife. The more officials avoided direct confrontation, the more resentment was allowed to grow beneath the surface. Anne reportedly warned that vague assurances about independence, visibility, money, titles, and influence would eventually feel like betrayal. Harry and Meghan were being encouraged to imagine freedom within a system built on control. That contradiction could not survive forever. Most disturbing was her fear that private disputes would one day escape the palace completely. Arguments once contained through silence could be retold publicly, shaped by pain, and used to challenge the institution before a global audience. But Meghan remained popular. Courtiers feared that limiting her role would produce damaging headlines. Charles was torn between protecting his son and preserving royal authority. Queen Elizabeth still hoped that patience, duty, and time would restore balance. Some advisors allegedly dismissed Anne as too traditional, unable to understand a changing media world. Yet her concern was not about change itself. It was about promises the monarchy lacked the courage to define. Then came her most precise prediction, the one that reportedly changed the mood of the meeting. If Meghan ever walked away feeling deceived, Harry would not leave quietly beside her. That prediction was the truth the palace tried hardest to suppress. Because Anne was not merely warning that Meghan might leave, she was warning what would happen after she did. Anne's alleged warning was devastatingly specific. If the palace continued making Meghan feel powerful in public, but powerless in private, she and Harry would eventually break away, and once outside, they would use their experiences, grievances, and royal connection to challenge the institution before the entire world. The danger, Anne reportedly believed, was hidden inside the palace's own strategy. Meghan was being celebrated as a transformative royal, praised for bringing energy, relevance, and international attention to the crown. Yet behind closed doors, she was expected to surrender control, accept delays without explanation, and obey limits that had never been clearly defined. To palace officials, this was normal hierarchy. To Meghan, it could eventually feel like deception. Anne allegedly warned that the contradiction would not remain contained. Every disagreement left unresolved, every promise softened, and every request quietly denied could later become part of a much larger story. A story of exclusion, neglect, and betrayal. Harry made the risk even greater. His anger toward the press and his distrust of the institution had not disappeared. Anne reportedly feared that if Meghan felt attacked, Harry would not see separate mistakes or misunderstandings. He would see a pattern. The couple could become trapped inside an us-against-them struggle in which every restriction appeared to confirm their worst suspicions. Her prediction went further. She feared Harry and Meghan might leave official royal life while continuing to rely on their royal connection, creating a conflict the monarchy had never faced before. Personal freedom would collide with institutional loyalty. Titles, security, money, public status, and access to family occasions could become bargaining tools in a battle with no clean ending. Anne allegedly urged the palace to choose. Either give the couple a clearly defined position with firm responsibilities and enforceable boundaries, or prepare a controlled departure before private resentment destroyed the family relationship. The palace chose neither. Instead, officials delayed difficult conversations, offered temporary reassurance, and hoped time would soften the conflict. Admitting Anne was right would have meant accepting that the monarchy's celebrated modernization plan was already beginning to fail. Harry may have been told Meghan could thrive inside the system without being told what survival within that system would demand from her. Meghan may have sensed resistance everywhere, yet never known that Anne had challenged the entire arrangement at the highest level. Years later, the accusations, public revelations, and battles over royal status appeared to follow the warning with chilling precision. And now, the details may be emerging, because someone inside the palace believes the consequences are still growing. Once the warning had been ignored, the question was no longer whether the relationship would break, but which private wound would finally push Harry and Meghan beyond the point of return. The rupture did not happen in a single explosion. It came through a sequence of decisions, each one presented as procedure, each one felt as rejection. Then the palace made one choice that reportedly convinced Harry the institution would always protect itself before protecting Meghan, transforming frustration into permanent distrust. The decision allegedly involved more than one issue. It touched the couple's household, their public voice, their financial freedom, and the limits of their independence. Palace officials believed tighter control was necessary. Separate offices, competing messages, and growing public attention were beginning to create the impression that Harry and Meghan were building a royal power center of their own. To the institution, restructuring was protection. To Harry, it was punishment. He reportedly saw the decision as final proof that Meghan would never be allowed to succeed on equal terms. Every promise of support now appeared conditional. Every assurance seemed weaker than the rules imposed afterward. What the palace called order, Harry experienced as betrayal. From that moment, conversations became more guarded. Trust faded between the Sussex household and other royal offices. Messages were checked carefully. Meetings carried hidden tension. Even ordinary discussions felt dangerous because neither side believed the other was speaking honestly. Meghan allegedly began remembering every promise, every delay, and every contradiction. She may have started recording details privately, not necessarily for publication, but because informal assurances no longer felt reliable. Anne reportedly recognized the pattern immediately. The collection of grievances she had feared was taking shape, one wound at a time. William's concern was also deepening. He may have believed Harry's demands had moved beyond protecting Meghan and were now challenging the structure that kept royal authority intact. If one couple could operate independently while retaining full status, others might eventually demand the same freedom. Charles hesitated. He wanted to calm his son without weakening the crown. But every delayed answer created more suspicion. Courtiers feared direct confrontation would push the couple toward the exit. Yet endless compromise was already weakening palace control. Anne allegedly warned them again. Emotional reassurance meant nothing without clear terms. Promising affection while enforcing hidden limits would only make the final break more bitter. Harry's loyalty hardened whenever he believed Meghan was being compared unfavorably with other royal women. He no longer saw isolated decisions. He saw a system closing around his wife. The approaching departure would not end that conflict. It would remove the walls that had contained it. And when Harry and Meghan finally stepped away, the monarchy discovered that losing control of their roles also meant losing control of the story they were prepared to tell. When the Sussexes announced their new path, the palace reacted as though it had been blindsided. Anne allegedly was not surprised. The separation followed the pattern she had already described: unclear promises, growing resentment, a fight over royal privileges, and a public narrative the monarchy could no longer quietly contain. The exit was presented as a dramatic turning point, but it had not appeared overnight. It was the result of years of unanswered questions, private disappointments, and expectations that neither side had been willing to define honestly. By the time Harry and Meghan decided to step back, the relationship had already been weakened by suspicion. Then came the negotiations. Palace officials struggled to decide what the couple could keep: titles, patronages, public funding, security, commercial branding, and access to royal occasions suddenly became subjects of intense dispute. On paper, these were administrative matters. Emotionally, they meant something far greater. To Harry, retaining certain privileges could prove that he had not been rejected by his family. To Meghan, independence offered dignity, safety, and control over a voice she believed had been restricted. But the palace feared that allowing them to remain partly inside the institution while operating freely outside it would create a rival royal structure. Harry reportedly believed compromise was still possible. He imagined a role in which he and Meghan could continue supporting the crown while escaping the machinery that had caused them pain. The institution saw danger. A half-in, half-out arrangement could weaken hierarchy and make royal status appear negotiable. It was exactly the conflict Anne had allegedly predicted. Harry and Meghan might leave official service, but their royal identity would remain central to their influence, and therefore central to every future argument. For Queen Elizabeth, the decision carried private sorrow. She had to balance her affection for Harry against the stability of the monarchy she had spent her life protecting. Charles hoped time might soften the anger. William increasingly saw the split as a direct threat to royal credibility. Anne reportedly pushed for firm boundaries, not out of revenge, but because uncertainty would keep the battle alive. Without clear terms, every interview, family absence, security dispute, and ceremonial invitation could become another public negotiation. The media pressure hardened both camps. Every statement was examined for insult. Every silence appeared deliberate. Even private family moments became evidence in a conflict neither side fully controlled. Meanwhile, material connected to Anne's earlier warning was allegedly restricted, softened, or kept from wider palace discussion. But secrecy could only delay the reckoning. The interviews ahead would make her prediction impossible to bury. But departure was only the beginning. Because once the palace lost the power to enforce silence, Harry and Meghan began describing the institution in terms Anne had feared from the start. Every interview, documentary, memoir, and accusation appeared to reopen the same royal wound. Yet beneath the public battle lay a more private conflict: Meghan's belief that the palace had failed her, Harry's belief that history was repeating itself, and Anne's belief that the disaster had once been preventable. Once the Sussexes began speaking publicly, the conflict changed forever. What had once been contained within private meetings, guarded phone calls, and palace corridors became a worldwide contest over truth. Every claim demanded an answer. Every silence created suspicion. The family was no longer arguing only with one another. They were fighting for credibility before millions. The palace relied on restraint, believing public responses would deepen the crisis. Harry and Meghan chose personal testimony. Their pain became their evidence, allowing them to define the meaning of events the monarchy refused to discuss. For Meghan, the story was rooted in isolation and broken expectations. She had entered royal life believing support would follow sacrifice. Instead, she reportedly felt her well-being became less important than protecting the institution's image. Harry's anger carried older wounds. His memories of Diana, his hatred of press intrusion, and his fear of losing another woman he loved shaped every confrontation. To him, silence was not dignity. It was abandonment repeating itself. Anne allegedly saw the conflict differently. She could accept that pain was real while still believing public attacks carried consequences for everyone who continued serving the crown. In her view, personal suffering did not erase institutional responsibility. That difference exposed a hidden rivalry between two ideas of royal womanhood. Meghan represented voice, independence, and the right to challenge a system that caused harm. Anne represented endurance, discipline, and the belief that duty sometimes required silence. This was larger than personality. It was a clash between opposing forms of power. William reportedly became convinced that reconciliation required accountability, not merely another meeting. Charles remained trapped between the instincts of a father and the obligations of a monarch. Now, the resurfacing of Anne's warning threatens to embarrass those who dismissed her and strengthen those demanding harder boundaries. Harry may only recently have learned how early concerns about Meghan were raised and how many decisions were made without him. The final truth may not simply be that Anne predicted the collapse. It may be that the palace is still repeating the exact pattern she warned against. Because even now, with trust shattered and every reunion surrounded by suspicion, the monarchy is once again considering how much access, recognition, and royal legitimacy Harry and Meghan should be allowed to retain. The truth about Anne's warning does more than reopen an old argument. It threatens to reshape every future decision involving Harry, Meghan, their children, royal titles, family ceremonies, and the line between private reconciliation and public authority. The palace ignored her once. It may not survive doing so again. If Anne truly warned senior royals before the collapse, then this was never an unpredictable family disaster. It was an institutional crisis the monarchy allegedly saw coming and still failed to stop. The greatest mistake may not have been one argument, one interview, or one departure. It was the refusal to define expectations while trust could still be repaired. Anne would have little reason to celebrate being proved right. Her alleged frustration was never simply with Meghan or Harry. It was with the ambiguity that allowed hope to become resentment and private pain to harden into public conflict. For Harry, the revelation could deepen an already painful belief that Meghan was judged before she was fully understood. If he learns that Charles, William, or senior officials knew of Anne's concerns but never spoke honestly to him, reconciliation could feel less like healing and more like another controlled negotiation. For Meghan, discovering that the sustainability of her royal role had been questioned in private could confirm her worst suspicions. She may see it as evidence that the institution welcomed her image while doubting her place inside it. Then there are Archie and Lilibet. Their titles, inheritance, ceremonial inclusion, family identity, and relationship with the monarchy, now sit inside a conflict they did not create. Any private reunion could be interpreted as restored royal influence, while any continued distance could deepen the divide for another generation. William may now favor Anne's approach. Written terms, strict boundaries, and no undefined position between private family member and public royal figure. Charles faces the harder choice. Does he protect the institution through certainty, or risk its stability in pursuit of family healing? Former aides, hidden records, and private recollections may yet reveal who supported Anne, who dismissed her, and who helped bury the warning. The irony is brutal. The palace feared confrontation would cause a crisis, but silence created something far larger. Anne's warning was never only about Meghan. It was about what happens when an ancient institution uses silence to control emotional conflict. Because behind palace doors, warnings are rarely forgotten, they are merely buried until the consequences become too public, too painful, and too dangerous to hide.